My grandfather Thomas was a serious man. He worked every day of his life. First as a lawyer, then as a judge. My grandmother Charlotte was his darling wife. They had 7 children and 42 grandkids who looked up to him as the great patriarch. He spent his whole life here in New York City, quietly making his mark. Grandpa was a type A workaholic before we knew what those terms meant. He would bring briefcases filled with work papers to every family event. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He was quite formal whenever he spoke. And though we loved him, we never felt close. He was a serious man. Yes, my grandfather was a very serious man. He loved the law, he loved upholding the law, and he prided himself on never breaking the law. Though he did have some trouble with social conventions. My grandparents had season tickets to the Metropolitan Opera, and my grandfather had to sit on the aisle for a very practical reason. He would bring his work papers to the opera, and he would use the tiny lights along the floor to illuminate them. I don't think ushers at the Met today would tolerate that kind of behavior, but he got away with it back then. Now, my grandma and grandpa never took any exotic trips. With so many grandchildren, their dance card was pretty much filled. Every weekend, they'd be attending a christening or a confirmation or a graduation or a birthday or a wedding. And you could see Grandpa in all the family photos, serious and stately in his pinstripe suit, bow tie and fedora, never smiling. Though in a couple of the pictures we noticed recently that he had a bit of a faraway look in his eye. We figured he was probably working on a case in his head when that picture was snapped. One shining Sunday in the mid-1960s, Grandma and Grandpa visited our family. We lived up in Peekskill on the banks of the Hudson. My parents, 5 brothers, 3 sisters, and me. As I recall, we girls were with Grandma having cookies and tea in the living room. In the field next to our house were the boys playing baseball that afternoon. The field next to our house was really a long sloping hill. Home plate was at the bottom of that hill. The pitcher's mound was partway up the hill. Then there was the infield, and the outfield was all the way up against the side of our house, but nobody ever played that far back, because nobody could ever hit that far with the angle and all. So there I was, looking out the window, watching my brothers play baseball. Then I went back to listening to Grandma tell us stories. I didn't know where Grandpa was, but I figured, like always, he was off in the corner somewhere working. But he wasn't. Never before and never since something big happened that day. Grandpa put his work papers aside. He told my brothers he wanted to play. He took off his jacket, he undid his bow tie. My brother Greg was pitching, he wound up and let it fly. Grandpa connected, he hit that ball high, 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 high. Grandma was telling us another story about New York in the olden days. Before there was a George Washington Bridge, Empire State Building, even subways, all of a sudden the window shattered. We all jumped up to see what could the matter be. To the floor, cups and saucers clattered. We saw the baseball, wondered who could the batter be. We ran to the broken glass, and there at the bottom of the hill stood our dear grandpa, leaning on his bat, smiling his guts out, enjoying the thrill. 40 years later, we can still picture him proud as a peacock, puffed up with joy. The only time we ever witnessed our grandpa just being one